Isn't that great news? All you have to do is come up here to the porch, come here, give my son a big hug, tell him you love, thank him for what he did for you, and come up, give me a big hug, and you can move in with us, we'll live up in the attic together, and you can spend forever just telling me how great I am. Isn't that the best news in the world? So what would you do? Would you just keep walking? Like, I got to get to work, sorry, thanks for telling me that. So, that's the good news of the gospel, basically, right? For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Perish from what? What punishment? From his own punishment. And the only way his anger is appeased is by some kind of blood atonement. Something's got to die. Something's got to bleed. If you read the Old Testament, you see just blood, 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 blood. How many sacrifices? There's only 3 places I found in the entire Old Testament where anybody said they loved God. Can you believe that? God's always telling people, love me, love me. I'm jealous. Don't love anybody else. Don't look at other idols, just me. Kind of like a man, husband, you know, if you ever look sideways at another man, you're in trouble. It's kind of that kind of thing. It's a jealous God who just wants his bride for himself. And he's always telling them to love him. But I always found 3 places where somebody actually said that they loved God. 2 of them were the psalmist, David. By the way, David was chosen because he was more genocidal than Saul. Saul killed his thousands, but David killed his 10,000s. He was a greater, he was a man after God's own heart because he was a better genocidal murderer than Saul was. Saul got dethroned because he didn't finish the job. But Solomon said that he loved God by burning 1,000 animals. So there's 3 times, at least in the Old Testament I found, that somebody said they actually loved God. In the Bible, love is a one-way thing. It's a top-down kind of thing. I own you, I possess you, you love me, you don't love anyone else, and I'm going to love you, and I'm going to show you how great I am to you, but you stay with me. If you don't, you're in trouble. In fact, you read what happens, that kind of love within the Christian message. But when I was a believer, I thought it was important, and I thought heaven and hell were real. I thought they were eternal realities and that people needed to know that. I thought I was doing you a favor. I was that guy on campus, you know, I was that self-confident, I had the truth. And truth has to be absolute, and morality has to be based on absolute objective principles, or else we're just ships without a rudder. We don't know why we're here. We don't know what our meaning is or our purpose in life. And I thought you would want to know that. You know, it was your lucky day when you got to know me because I had this gospel message. And it'd be like if you were walking across the street and a truck was coming, wouldn't you want someone to pull you out of the way? Isn't that a good thing? To want to help, to want to save, to want to care about people. So that's what I thought my evangelism was saving souls from this horrible destiny, from the basement, right? Saving souls from this anger of this deity who, if you don't worship him exactly the right way or on the right day of the week or saying so many words or that you're going to have to be punished. Somebody has got to bleed. Somebody has got to die. I became an atheist in 1983, and for about 4 or 5 months I kept preaching until I finally stopped. I was a hypocrite for 4 or 5 months. In January of '84, I sent out my letter to everybody announcing I'm no longer a believer. And then I got a job as a computer programmer, which was good luck. You know, a lot of clergy, when they leave the ministry, they don't know what to do. What good is a divinity degree in this economy? In fact, the Clergy Project, of which I'm one of the principal founders, along with Daniel Dennett and Richard Dawkins and Linda Lascola, has about 650 members of it now. Clergy, priests, rabbis, some cantors, ministers who have given up their belief in the supernatural. Some of them are still preaching, and they're trying to find a way out. And I was like that for a few months until I finally got a job. That's the big problem with them. They need another job. They need an income. They have a family that they love. They want to do good in the world. And so the Clergy Project is helping some of these ministers make that transition into civilian life, I guess, or into honest work, I guess we could say it that way. And in 8 months later, in 1984, after I left the ministry, I had stopped preaching. I got a call from a producer at a TV show in Chicago saying that they were doing a morning show about atheism, and a woman named Ann Gaylor and her daughter named Annie Laurie Gaylor, who live in Madison, Wisconsin, who founded the Freedom from Religion Foundation, were going to be guests on that show. And I had a good story. I used to be a minister, and now I'm an atheist, so could I come to be on that show? And I said, all right, this would be really fun. So they flew me to Chicago, from California to Chicago. And that was the first day that I knowingly talked with any other atheist in my life. And it was Ann Gaylor and Annie Laurie Gaylor. Annie Laurie and I are married now, and in fact we have a videotape of that show. The host of the show was a young woman named Oprah Winfrey. And she was fun, but she packed that audience with Bible thumpers. She packed it with all these, true believers, and they were going after us. And that was the very first time I had publicly spoken about my atheism before any audience, and it was a TV audience. And it was the first time I'd ever publicly spoken before a hostile audience, and I loved that. I thought, there's nothing more exciting than be talking to an audience that hates what you're saying. It's really an interesting thing. When you're a preacher before a congregation, it's kind of blah, right? I mean, they all already agree with you, right? You can say these things, and you get the applause and the amens and all that, and occasionally there might be some questions. Not once in 19 years of preaching, not once did anyone come up to me after my sermon and ask me, what were your sources? What references did you use? Who did you consult? No one actually asked me any intelligent questions about it. People were coming to church to worship, to praise, to be with God. And so, talking before a hostile audience like that, and Oprah had packed that place, it was really fun. And you can see us looking at each other. In fact, we showed our daughter, Sabrina. She's a senior at Whitewater right now, Sabrina. We showed her the videotape. You can see it online, of the day her mom and dad met on Oprah's show. And she was laughing and laughing, not just at the 1980s styles in music. And I had hair, I had a lot of hair. And and one of the audience members was calling Annie Laurie a witch. You're a witch because you're defying God. And I thought, wow, this is great. This is a lot better than preaching. This is like saying something. Saying something there's a differential there, right? There's something that's, and if you're making people think or making them upset or whatever, you're saying something that's different. It cuts across the status quo. So a few months after that, February of '85, I did my first public debate. And since then, I've done 118 public debates, meaning moderated and timed before an audience. In fact, one of them was right here, wasn't it when was that, Sam? It was earlier this year, wasn't it? Yeah. With Matt Slick? Yeah, and I'll put that thing on. And Matt really was slick, so that was a good debate. Is that online?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So you can see that. He's a Calvinist presuppositionalist. The Christian apologists all have different kind of flavors, and in fact, a lot of them fight with each other because there's different theologies. And so I've debated all sorts of, and I'm sure many of you have too, the arguments. There's about a dozen arguments. There's cosmological arguments like first cause. There's teleological arguments like the design arguments. There's ontological arguments, and some people are still using them. I debated Richard Swinburne in Dublin on the ontological argument. There's moral arguments. There's other types of arguments that believers try to put forth to try to reason to their faith. It's called apologetics. And if you like that kind of thing, it's fun. It's a good exercise. And like Bertrand Russell, I've come to agree with what Bertrand Russell said about these arguments, especially the ontological argument, is that if you, on the surface they look kind of intriguing, wow, yeah, design, yeah, what about, but he said if you scratch beneath the surface, they all just boil down to bad grammar. That's basically what they are. If you unpack them, it's just bad grammar, or circular logic, or it's begging the question. And honestly, how many people do you know that came to their faith in Christ as a result of contemplating the ontological argument? I mean, really, it's kind of like window dressing. It's kind of like a way to pretend like your faith is reasonable. people like William Lane Craig and other like Norman Geisler. In fact, I debated Norman Geisler right here. It was like, I don't know, my 5th or 8th debate here at the University of Wisconsin. And so often, after a debate, when the opponent realizes that there hasn't really been any progress made and how you're going to sink your teeth into this, often the debate opponent will say, well, maybe you're not convinced by the evidence. Maybe you're not convinced by the arguments. Maybe you're not convinced by, maybe you don't feel any personal need for, a creator or a relationship with this God. But if there's no God, there's no meaning in life. If there's no God, there's no purpose. It's just pointless if there's no God. You hear that a lot. I did a debate in Oxford 2 years ago, Oxford, England, with the mathematician John Lennox, who's a theist, with Christopher Hitchens' brother, Peter Hitchens, and it was just after Christopher Hitchens had died, and Peter Hitchens is a strongly believing Anglican, and then an Anglican priest, and it was me and Michael Shermer and a philosopher named Peter Millikan. The three of us went against the three of them. It was really fun. It was like we had to wear bow ties and tuxedos, and it was all parliamentary. You know how it is in that. That's where Parliament actually began, was in that Oxford Debating Society room, with all these statues and pictures. And all. It was really kind of neat. We had to do a toast to the Queen and all that. So we did this debate, and Richard Dawkins was in the audience too. He should have been the one debating, but he was in the audience. So, but Peter Hitchens made that very argument. Peter Hitchens got up, and he was. In fact, I'm reproducing it in my next book, and you can read the paragraph that he said. But Peter Hitchens said, "Let's not talk about evidence. Come on, let's admit what kind of game we're playing here. Let's not talk about arguments. Come on, you atheists. You remind me of the little kids who are just arguing on the playground. Arguments and evidence, blah, 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 blah. What's really at the core of your atheism?" He said, "It's really, what kind of a person are you? Who would want to live in a universe that has no hope? What's wrong with you atheists? Who would want to live in a universe where you have no expectation of seeing your loved ones again? Who would want to live in a cosmos with no meaning and no ultimate purpose? Who would actively desire and wish to live in a world like that?" And he was lecturing us atheists, like, what's wrong with you that you're choosing to live in such a bleak, empty, depressing universe, an atheistic universe? That was his argument at an Oxford debate. That was his argument, basically, just attacking. It was really ad hominem. So, but you hear that a lot. What's the meaning in life? What is the purpose if there's no God, if there's no ultimate standard up there and above there? So, I have a new book coming out. Appropriately, it's coming out on April the 1st. Psalm 14:1 or Psalm 53, "The fool had said in his heart, there is no God." By the way, this is one proof that the Bible has at least one error in it. Read Psalm 14. "The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are all corrupt. They have never done a single good thing. They are all filthy." In fact, I had to take that book out of my hotel room, the last hotel I was at, and I even wrote a note there. Why do you have a book in here that insults some of your paying customers? That book is calling me a fool and saying I'm filthy. What if it said, all Jews are corrupt and filthy and have never done a good thing? Do you think anyone would complain about that? And yet all atheists are painted as these horribly corrupt things. So, this book is coming out on April the 1st. It's called, and some of you will get this, it's called Life-Driven Purpose. And those of you who laugh understand that. Rick Warren, the big megachurch pastor, Saddleback Church in Southern California. Rick Warren, his big blockbuster, best-selling Christian book is called The Purpose-Driven Life. In fact, I was visiting my brother Tom, who's a born-again Christian. He's the one member of our family who stayed in the faith. The rest of us are atheists now, my brother and my mom and dad. We call Tom the white sheep of the family. I visited him last month in Riverside, California, and sure enough, right there next to the Bible. By the way, there weren't very many books in his apartment. That was kind of weird. Can you imagine a place with not many books in it? But anyway, he had the Bible and then The Purpose-Driven Life. Those two books up there next to the TV guide, So And it's very meaningful to him. And he's a good guy. I'm not putting him down as a person. He's compassionate, he's caring, he's a giving. He's a retired high school principal. We get along, we disagree about religion, but we're a family, you know, so we didn't talk at all about religion. We just talked about our childhood and all that stuff. But the purpose-driven life is a big deal to him and a lot of people. And he thinks there's a lot of merit in that book. Rick Warren came to our attention a few years ago because back in the late 1990s, Rick Warren was abusing the tax code, and the IRS called him out on it. There's a provision in the tax code, which the Freedom from Religion Foundation is suing over right now, that allows ministers of the gospel to exclude their housing as income. So if you pay a house payment or rent, did you know that? Clergy? In fact, rabbi are considered ministers of the gospel in the tax code. Figure that out. Wouldn't you love to do that? Wouldn't you love when you're doing your taxes to say, oh, by the way, my house payments and my rent wasn't income. It drastically lowers their liability. And that's an IRS tax code that was given in the 1950s to reward ministers of the gospel for fighting the good spiritual fight against the common enemy, which was what? Godless communism, right? So we think that's unconstitutional. But in the event, Rick Warren, back in the late 90s, mid to late 90s, got his church to declare that his entire salary was a housing allowance. So he had zero income for those years. That's defrauding the government. That's cheating in the tax code. The IRS said you can't do that, and so Congress stepped in actually and modified the law, and so now it's limited to fair market value. So Rick Warren's parishioners might have a purpose-driven life, but he has a loophole-driven life, I think. You know, and here he's the guy that got to give the opening prayer at Obama's first inauguration. I mean, people like that, because of their stature within the religious community. I think purpose-driven life is totally backwards, totally upside down, which is why I'm calling my book Life-Driven Purpose. Like I said earlier, most religions and most religious people have a kind of top-down view of reality. There's a sovereign. Here in a country that is proudly rebellious, our country fought a revolutionary war to kick out the king, the monarch, the sovereign, the lord, the master. And instead of having a country that's underneath some higher authority up here from which we get our rights and our laws, we did this. We flipped it upside down. And what's the highest authority in the United States? What are the first words of our Constitution? We the people. We the people. There's no sovereign, there's no authority above, there's no credentials, there's no, you know what I mean? There's no stamp of approval. We the people. We were the first country ever to do that. Not to be based on some church or religion or monarchy or some higher authority. We flipped it upside down. And most atheists in the world have that bottom-up view of reality rather than a top-down kind of a view. We think there is purpose in life, but it's life-driven purpose, not a purpose-driven life. Have any of you read Rick Warren's book? No? One person at least? Couple? You're welcome to read it, but I'll save you the trouble if you want to know what is the purpose of life. I'll summarize it for you. You can read that whole book through, and guess what the purpose of life is according to Rick Warren? To know God, to glorify God, to serve God, and go to church and try to get others to go to church with you. That's it. That's the purpose. That's why you were placed on this planet. Rick Warren says you don't get to choose your purpose. Your purpose is chosen for you. You have a life that's driven by a purpose from outside. So this new book, I have an advanced copy, but it's not. It's an uncorrected advanced copy. The publisher has delayed it for a good reason. The publisher wants to take this off. Am I getting too excited? The publisher wants to. I think it just popped out of there. You can hear me okay? It doesn't matter too much. I need Sam's help again. Sam's the fix-it man. Does it work? There, okay, thanks. There. No?
Yeah, just one.
So, the publisher with a brand new distributor is hoping that this book... Have you ever been to an airport or a bookstore and you see those racks of inspirational / motivational books? 7 Steps to Fulfillment. Or How to Know God's Plan for Your Life. Or, you know, these Rick Warren, Joel Osteen, and these kind of things. 12 Purposes to Make You a Better. All these kind of psycho-faith books that are like telling us, giving us this information of how we can have lives full of meaning and purpose. The publisher is hoping that this will be the first atheist book on the inspirational bookshelves. They're aiming it for that, and they're calling it an inspirational book. And my line, and I say in the introduction, is that we atheists are truly inspired. Believers are outspired. Believers need something outside of themselves, above and beyond them, to come down to tell them what to do, like a puppet master or something. We atheists, most of us, don't think there's something up there. Like Daniel Dennett said, is it a skyhook or is it a crane, if you read his book. Believers have this skyhook that's magically just hanging in the air. Well, non-believers can get the same thing as long as it's a crane. It's connected to the ground and comes up and back around again. So you can have the same kind of a life if you're doing it that way. So, most believers, and I'm not painting all of them with the same brush, obviously, because there's a huge variety. In fact, there's probably as many Christianities as there are Christians in the world. Each one kind of has a different theology and view, and they fight with each other over it. But most believers have a kind of top-down idea of what life is all about. We were put here by something above us, who then gives us our orders or tells us where we fit in. And it's like, you know, if you're in the army or in the military and you need your commander to give you a job, and then you know what you're doing and you do it, and then you report back, great job, right? Or a slave master, or you know, a member of an orchestra. You know your part, you're doing your part, you know what to do. So a lot of believers think, well, what is my part? What am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to fit in and do my role and please and be and what is my purpose? What am I supposed to, why am I here? Where most non-believers, most atheists and agnostics, think we decide. Now I know there's a danger. I mean, there's a potential for believers to say there's a danger. Well, if you're deciding, then it's just all relative. You can do what you want. There's no absolute morality. There's no absolute standards. We're all just can be free and willing, and we don't even know what's true or what's right and wrong. But in practice, atheists and agnostics actually are not only just as good morally as believers, but sometimes even more good, because we're doing it for real reasons, not to gain brownie points, not to prove that we are fitting into some plan. If you're doing good works in order to glorify the Master, then you're kind of ignoring the people who are the recipients of your good work. Even Jesus said that. Let your work, you know, do your works so that your Father in heaven may be glorified. Isn't the object of charity the object of charity? Shouldn't you be doing it because you care about human beings rather than because you're trying to please this Lord? Most religious systems are like a slave system. And even Paul in the New Testament proudly said he was a slave of Christ, a doulos, a slave of Christ. He said, bring into captivity every thought unto the obedience of Christ. The Christian scheme is not a scheme of freedom. It's a scheme of obedience and submission and fitting in. What does the word Islam mean? Submission, obeying, fitting in, following orders. Have you ever noticed the postures of prayer? When you picture somebody praying in your mind, what are you picturing? This, right? Knees, prostration, right? Those are the postures of slavery. The Master is great. I am no threat to the Master. My wrists are shackled together. I'm not going to fight you. I'm not going to run away. I'm not going to have a slavery role. I'm going to show you how great you are and how humble I am. And so the postures of prayer, when you think about it, are postures of slavery. Christianity especially is a slavery mentality. There's a master who will punish you if you don't do what's right. You better do what that master says. And by doing what that master says, you earn points and you get to be rewarded. And if you don't, you're going to be punished. Jesus even preached slavery in the New Testament, in the book of Luke, chapter 12. Jesus showed us how compassionate he was by suggesting that there are some slaves that you should not beat as hard as others. Some didn't know any better. So don't beat them as hard. Don't be a total jerk. You can beat your slaves, but do it judiciously. He never once spoke out against slavery. Slavery was the natural order. The Old Testament especially is almost a slave manual. You pay half as much for a woman. There's all these rules for what happens when you buy slaves, depending if it's a Hebrew slave or slave of neighboring people. You treat the Hebrew slaves a little more nicely, basically. So it really is a kind of top-down, above-us kind of thing, where most atheists view life as organic. We are biological organisms in a natural environment, and our lives are what we would call bottom-up. We live them through our natural world that we live within. And the believers like Rick Warren and Joel Osteen think the purpose of life is to glorify the Master. Asking the question, if there's no God, what is the meaning of life, is like asking the question, if there's no Master, whose slave will I be? How am I going to know what to do? How am I going to find direction? What decisions am I going to make? So instead of the good news that you don't have to go down in the basement, I think the truly good news that we atheists offer the world, and I think most believers actually agree with us, but the truly good news that we atheists offer to the world is that there is no purpose of life. Maybe that sounds counterintuitive, but that is great news. Life is its own reward. If there's a purpose of life, then we are secondary. We are submissive to some top-down authority. The fact that there's no purpose of life is true freedom. Because if there is a purpose of life, we're not free. We're attached by a puppet string to something. We're trying to march to some orders. But, and here's an important point, to say that there's no purpose of life is not to say that there's no purpose in life. So instead of thinking that we have purpose-driven lives, purpose of life, turn it upside down and think we have plenty of purpose in our lives. And what does purpose mean? What does the word purpose actually mean? What definition would you give for the word purpose?
Reason why.
A reason why? A purpose? Okay.
Defined goal.
Defined goal? Okay. Anything else? This is not a college class.
Function of existence.
A function of existence? It's interesting because people like Wayne Lane Craig, they talk about purpose, but they never actually define it, Any living organism, a tree, the roots of the tree reach to the river. They're striving to reach something for survival or for well-being. Sam Harris, in his book, The Moral Landscape, uses the phrase well-being, which I think is a useful way to look at kind of the bottom line of what our moral decisions are like. I kind of think morality boils down to, at minimum, the minimization of harm, the avoiding of harm in the real world. And harm, whatever it is natural. Purpose is striving for a goal. A purpose is you've got some object or target and you're trying to get there. Or you're trying to get away from something, right? Fight or flight. A purpose in life comes from seeking some kind of a goal which either enhances our survival or contributes to our well-being as individuals. So it can be anything. Purpose comes in the real world not from flattering the ego of some megalomaniacal master who needs to be praised all the time and tells us that's like a toddler mentality. Am I making daddy happy? In the real world, in which we actually live as biological organisms, we bump into all sorts of problems. There are threats, obstacles, challenges to survival that we have to meet. How is that tree going to get water? Those roots better find water. It's a goal. There's a purpose there. So it can be anything. It can be hunger. It can be thirst. It could be predation. It can be natural disasters. It can be war. It can be inequality. It can be oppression. It can be disease. If any of us is fighting any of those problems, if any of us is working to overcome those hurdles and those challenges, we have lives of immense purpose. We have purpose in life by identifying a problem and trying to solve it. Purpose is basically problem solving. How do you solve, building a house is problem solving. We have elements, especially during these months, we need shelter. So no one's going to dictate to you what your purpose must be. Certainly atheism doesn't have some big Vatican pope that's saying, we're going to hand out orders to all you atheists now. Now Sam, here's your job. You need to at least bring 12 more members into AHA by the end of the month, all right? And when you do, I can say, well done, my good and faithful servant, You would quit, wouldn't you, right? If somebody got up and said, I am the bishop of atheism, and here are my orders. Yeah, I mean, that's totally top down, right? When we think life is bottom up. In atheism, there's no hierarchy. There's no creed. There's no dogma. There's no litmus test. There's nothing you have to sign. Atheism really is nothing. It's just the absence of theism. So, who would dare say that someone like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who was an atheist in the 19th century, who fought for a half a century, for about 50 years, she fought for women's suffrage. Way back during the time when women couldn't go to college, they didn't control their own property, they didn't control their own children, they couldn't vote. She fought for this crazy idea that women should be able to participate in their own democracy. What a crazy idea, right? She spent her whole life fighting for that. That was a problem in society. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, an atheist, along with her friend Susan B. Anthony, who was an agnostic Unitarian, and Anthony really admired Stanton's outspokenness. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was always bashing the Bible. The Bible's our worst enemy to women. Get rid of the Bible. She could hardly write or say a thing without saying something about. In fact, she was asked to write an article once for Bicycling magazine. The issue about how women should ride bicycles, basically. And she was attacking the Bible in a bicycling magazine. The Bible and the church are the greatest obstacles toward women's emancipation that we find, because it was the church that was fighting them. The church and the conservatives, most of them, except with some exceptions, the Quakers turned out to be pretty good on these issues, and some of the liberal churches turned out to be good. But in general, it was the priests and the ministers who were fighting this progress. Same thing with birth control. Same thing with interracial marriage. And now with gay marriage, right? You see the church as the enemies of these things. So she lived a life of immense purpose. Not purpose of life. No one told her to do that. She chose to do it because of her own heart, her own mind, her own feelings in her own life. So if you want purpose in your life, don't ask me. Don't ask your pastor. You could ask for suggestions maybe. You could ask your guidance counselor for, some directions and for somebody to maybe help facilitate it, but you have to choose. So I'm going to talk about meaning in a second, because there's a difference between purpose and meaning. But meaning and purpose sometimes are something that you find. Suppose one of your siblings dies of some horrible rare disease, tragedy in your family, and you decide, I'm going to dedicate my life to fighting that disease. Purpose in life. In fact, did you find that purpose, or did that purpose find you? Either way, there's a problem that you have identified, and you're going to latch onto that problem, and you're going to dedicate yourself to trying to solve that problem. Whether you solve it or not, Elizabeth Cady Stanton died before the 19th Amendment. She didn't get to see it. She authored that 19th Amendment. She died. She never got to see that happen in her lifetime. But she had a life of immense purpose, and so do thousands, millions of atheists and agnostics who are working to make this world a better place. William Lane Craig and his book Reasonable Faith. William Lane Craig is probably the best Christian apologist debater there is. He and I did one kind of silly debate, actually. It wasn't a real debate. It was on television. We were on a national TV show where it's more like a talk show than a debate. But he pulled out the trump card, and a lot of believers do this. Evidence, argument, and all that kind of stuff. And at the end of it, he said, well, you know what? None of that actually matters because I personally know God. I have a personal relationship with God. And if you did too, then you would know what I'm talking about. They all do that. I debated a Hindu Vedic astrologer in Toronto a couple of years ago. He did the same thing. If you don't have a personal relationship with Shiva, Shiva is wonderful. I know Shiva personally. And if you don't, then you are blind. So he's talking about Shiva the same way William Lane Craig talks about Jesus and God, right? Most religions claim that they have some mystical connection, some transcendental connection to something above and beyond the natural world. So William Lane Craig, in his book Reasonable Faith, says, without God, existence is a horror. It's empty, it's meaningless, without any ultimate purpose. Excuse me. If there's no ultimate meaning and no ultimate purpose, then when we die, we're just dead, and there's no point to that. How horrible. How horrible the lives of atheists must be to think that you're going to reach this end point of your life, and that's it. It's over. And he goes on and on about the need for ultimate meaning and ultimate purpose. Making a mistake, by the way, and he never clarifies it in his book. Not only does he not define meaning or purpose, which I do in here, he makes the mistake of assuming that meaning can only be ultimate, or else it's worthless. Any meaning short of ultimate meaning and purpose is unsatisfactory. We're all empty. We've all got nothing. It would be kind of like, suppose you have a job you really like. You work hard at your job, but you're looking forward to your vacation. And whatever you like to do on your vacation. Picture the perfect vacation. In a couple of weeks, you're going to go on vacation. Yeah, we all look forward to that, right? Maybe you like to ski or hike or go shopping or visit friends or swim, whatever you like to do on your vacation. You're looking forward, you're planning it, you've got your plane ticket, this is great. But then you realize, oh, wait a minute. Oh, silly me. When my vacation is over, I'm going to have to go back to work. It's not eternal. I may as well not go on vacation. It's going to end and it's going to be over. Is that what you would do? Wouldn't you take the vacation knowing it's going to end? You would still take it, right? You're going to enjoy yourself. Atheists and agnostics view the ride we are on right now just like that. It's going to end. It's going to be over. Before I was born, and before you were born, there was this huge amount of time, maybe an eternity of time, depending on your view of cosmology, huge long period of time when you didn't exist. You weren't here during the Civil War. You weren't here when Homer was writing his poetry. It didn't bother you one bit, did it? The same will be true after we're dead. It won't bother us one bit. We'll be gone. We'll be, we live now. And I think, having been a Christian minister and now an atheist for 3 decades, I think this enhances life. It gives more value to life than the pretense that it's eternal. What do we give greater value to? Things that are plentiful or things that are rare? Things that are rare and precious, we have more value to them. Value increases with rarity. If life is eternal, then life is cheap. It's just like anything. We don't pay for the air we breathe, unless you're on the surface of the moon or something. But I mean, it's a plentiful thing here, right? So I think we atheists and agnostics actually have a greater appreciation, a greater precious value of the lives we have because they will end. The fact that they will end gives them more meaning, gives them more purpose, more enjoyment than thinking, oh, I can put this off because I'm going to live forever in an eternity in heaven, right? Up in the attic, telling this God how great He is forever for keeping me from going down in the basement. I mean, that's what I used to preach. So, here we are.
Maybe you think we're here as a result of design, or maybe we're here as a result of a cosmic accident. Whatever you think about the quote-unquote design in natural selection, whatever it is, here we are, right? You exist. The improbable odds that any of us would have been born, but here we are. Amazing. So what meaning is there to it? You know, how do you answer William Lane Craig's question about ultimate meaning and purpose? Did any of you see the movie Pee-wee's Big Adventure? Silly, really silly. A deliciously stupid movie. And there's that scene where he's on his bike and then he crashes. And there's a bunch of kids watching him when he crashes. He falls down. And then he stands up and he says, "I meant to do that." Why is that funny? We know he didn't mean to do it, right? But if he could say, "I meant to do that," he's giving some meaning to the accident, right? The accident, depending on how well you value bike handling skills or whatever, at least he's trying to save some kind of a face by saying, "I meant, I had an intention to do that." Meaning is an intention. Meaning is an idea in the mind that precedes your intention. And meaning can be anything. It can be a concept or a thought or a phrase or a song or the color pink or the color puce. I just learned what the color puce is. How many know what that color is? 3 of you, right? Okay. Because my wife had a hat, she said, "It's a puce hat." I said, "It's a what?" "It's a puce hat." And so she had to explain to me what the color puce is. And so if I'm thinking the color puce, that's a meaning in the mind. So I think meaning becomes purpose at the point of intention. So you have a meaning in your mind, then you intend to do something. You're an artist, let's say, or a songwriter, or you're a computer programmer. Whatever you do, you have an idea that you want to express out in some way. You're a sculptor, or you're a poet, or you're just trying to talk to your friends. You have something in your mind that you want to get out. So meaning is something, an idea in one mind that is intended to be conveyed by some medium to another mind that pretty much gets what, so the two minds are pretty close to having the same concept. And so there's some kind of medium between them. And so it happens at intention. And I think purpose, you can have a meaning and then you intend to live your life in a certain way. You take an intentional stance and then you decide to do something. And then the acting out is the purpose. I think it's kind of like theory and practice. I think it's meaning and purpose is the same kind of a thing. So here we are. Maybe life is a big accident. Maybe we evolved through natural selection and just, here we are, right? How did you get here? Sam, why are you saying, how did you get here? What's it all about?
I walked.
You walked through the cold? Sometimes people ask me, how did you get here? And I say, well, my mom and dad fell in love and had sex. I mean, that's kind of basically it. I mean, that's why all of us are here, isn't it? Basically, two human beings came together some way, either naturally or maybe in vitro. Are there any in vitro babies? But we're here because of a material, biological, physical thing, not because of some undefinable spiritual reality. So, meaning is something that you can create. Something that you can find. I'll end with just one cute little story. That for my life was really, really meaningful. And for your life it'll be a totally different story. Because this is not a top-down thing to give people their meaning and purpose. I'm a musician. I play the piano, I write songs, and I love music. And my songs aren't all that... Is this off now?
Yeah, I was good.
But can you hear okay?
Yeah.
Dead battery?
Yeah.
You can keep. All right. And so I like to read a lot of biographies of songwriters and composers. And I was surprised and pleased how many songwriters have enriched the world with beauty, music and beauty, lyrics and music, who were not religious. You might be surprised how much of the music that you love has been a part of your life was written by atheists and agnostics. Even the song God Bless America. Irving Berlin didn't believe in God, but he wrote God Bless America for a character in one of his musicals, not for his own views. He told his daughter that he hated Christmas, because they were secular Jews. He really hated Christmas, but he wrote White Christmas. The man who wrote White Christmas said he hated Christmas. Went to... There we go. When we were in California, Sam was there with us in Los Angeles at the Millennium Biltmore, and he was our tech guy. He kept all the computers going. And, did I say he's intelligent and talented?
All those adjectives
Yeah.
I told him to say before me.
Oh, that's not going to work? Well, just unplug it there or something.
I tried.
He tried. He's got purpose. So anyway, Yip Harburg, who wrote Somewhere Over the Rainbow, was an agnostic humanist. And that's the #1 movie song of all time. Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Da-da.
It's a miracle. Thank you. Thank you, Sam.
I know how to change batteries. Such a genius.
Yip Harburg, who wrote all those great lyrics, April in Paris, and It's Only a Paper Moon, and I got to accompany the actress Butterfly McQueen singing Yip Harburg's Paper Moon song once. That was really, really fun. Yip Harburg also wrote poetry, and FFRF has published some of Yip Harburg's poetry. The guy who wrote Somewhere Over the Rainbow also wrote a poem called Lead Kindly Light. Where Bishop Patrick crossed the street, an X now marks the spot. The light of God was with him, but the traffic light was not. He was funny, he was witty, and he was a non-believer. Cole Porter, all those great Cole Porter songs. Cole Porter had to come out of 2 closets, and so did Stephen Sondheim, an atheist and gay. Jerome Kern, Just the Way You Look Tonight, and the Gershwins, both, George and Ira Gershwin. Anyway, so I read all these biographies, and I happened to find a biography of Charles Strauss. Charles Strauss is the songwriter who wrote Annie. The sun will come up tomorrow, the great, and he wrote Bye Bye Birdie, Put on a Happy Face, just all this great Broadway music. And a bunch of, he also wrote the All in the Family theme. Those were the days, remember that song? And he played the piano on it too. So, and he said in his little memoir, Put on a Happy Face, that he's a lifelong atheist. He's never believed in God. He's involved in the civil rights movement. He's trying to help. He and Sammy Davis Jr. marched down in Alabama together, and he played the piano for Butterfly McQueen, too, when she was touring and all that. Anyway, so I called him up and I said, hey, it's a great book. Can we interview you for our radio show? And he said, yeah, I never really talked about my atheism. He's in his 80s now. He lives in New York City. So we talked to him, and then we offered him an award, and he came to Connecticut to accept the award. And he got up to accept the award, and he kind of shouted, he said, I'm not much for speeches. Do you mind if I just play the piano and sing you some songs? Did we mind, And so he just entertained us for about 45 minutes with all these great songs, including my favorite, Once Upon a Time, one of my favorite all-time jazz tunes, because I play jazz piano. And so during dinner, we're talking, he's all excited. He said, you mean Richard Rodgers was an atheist? I didn't know that. He knew all these people. He was kind of the end of the Tin Pan Alley songwriters. He was the young kid. So he knew Richard Rodgers, and Richard Rodgers was an outspoken atheist. Doe, a deer, a female deer, and all of that stuff, The Sound of Music, and and then he said, oh, and Cole Porter too. I didn't know that. I wish I knew. I could have talked about all this stuff with them. And Burton Lane with Finian's Rainbow, and Jay Gorney, and just all these people. And then he turned to me during dinner and he said, hey, Dan, I've never written a song about my belief or atheism or anything like that. Send me some lyrics and I'll send them to music. And I thought, whoa. He's asking me. I mean, he's worked with Alan J. Lerner, and he's worked with, Martin Charnin, and he's worked with Lee Adams. And he's asking me to send some lyrics. So it took me about 6 months. Because you don't want to just, anybody and their Uncle Joe can write a poem. And any of us can do that, right? Because you don't want to just send someone like that any old stuff. It's got to be something you really like. And so I struggled, and I tried this idea and that idea, and that. In fact, I walk home from the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and I walk right by this building to walk home to the near west side. I've been doing it since '88. So wearing a path, thinking about the words and all that stuff, and I finally came up with an idea. I thought, oh, this might work. Combining irony into a list song. List songs that like, Let's Call the Whole Thing Off, or Cole Porter wrote a bunch of list songs. And so I sent Charles Strauss, after about 6 months, this lyrics that I thought was good enough, and he immediately emailed and said, "This is good. I can work with this, but do you mind if I do a little bit of editing? Do you mind?" And I said, "You're the pro. I mean, you're the Broadway, do what you want." So he threw away about 2/3 of my words. He just threw them in the trash can. He cut my song down like, which was the genius of his talent, his creativity to make a song that's going to be, because sometimes you can be kind of too preachy when you're writing poetry or songs. You can be trying to say too much and all that. And so the song is called Poor Little Me. And there's creativity, there's meaning, there's purpose in life by two people who don't believe in God but just enjoy the idea of communicating. And if you want to hear that song, it's recorded. It's on the album Adrift on a Star. You can find it on iTunes. It's called Poor Little Me. And he came up with music I never would have thought of. Because I think I'm a pretty good songwriter. But my music would have been good, but just good. You know what I mean? It wouldn't have been like, he came up with something totally breaking all the rules. He did a bunch of things that don't work. And because they don't work, they work. You know what I mean? In art, you sometimes have to do things like that. The meaning and the feeling of all that you put those things together. So, who would dare say that in any field of life, whatever it is, science or medicine or sculpture or songwriting or reform or social movements or charitable, who would dare say that we non-believers don't have meaningful lives? We have meaning that comes bottom up from within us, not top down. We have not a purpose-driven life, but we have life-driven purpose. So, I'm going to take a drink and we'll do some questions then.
If you have a question. Movement, as it were?
Well, it's improving, yes. Look at the success of the God Delusion, for example. And Richard Dawkins was an actual guest before Jon Stewart talking about his book, The God Delusion, in a comedic way, but still, at the table, right? Look at Sam Harris, look at Daniel Dennett, look at Christopher Hitchens, look at, even though most Americans would not agree with atheism, at least now, and this is pretty new over the last 10 years, at least now atheists are at the table. We're part of the fabric. It used to be an American you had to have some kind of a religion. It didn't matter what. Even if it was nutties. If you had some kind of a religion, even if you were Mormon, then you were okay, you were religious. But if you were atheist, you didn't have any religion, well then you're just a bad, evil, immoral person. The Bible says it, and and even today, even though the acceptance of atheists is improving, we're still at the bottom of the totem pole on every scale. When surveys are done, Penny Edgell at the University of Minnesota did a survey, 3 years ago? 4 years ago, about who would you vote for president and who would you want your kids to marry? Atheists came in lower. It came in less than 50% of Americans say they would do that. That's actually pretty high compared to the 1950s. But it's lower than Muslims, it's lower than gays, it's lower than any other minority group in the country right now. So we're still at the bottom. And atheism, maybe atheism is going to be the new gay, if you know what I mean. It's going to be, in the next decade or two, coming more up. And when you think about it, that's not so strange, because look at Europe. Europe used to be fiercely religious. They fought the 30 Years' War, killing each other over things like infant baptism. I mean, they were just... And now today in Europe you have these hundreds of gorgeous empty churches. You know what I mean? Most Europeans are thoroughly secular. Something happened over there which wasn't top down. Something happened in Europe which was basically we the people bottom up just becoming more secular. It looks like that's happening in this country as well, but there's still a ways to go. And one way to help is to just be out, just to be open about it. Sam is the real master here. I think he's the slave master.
I love how you've brought your preacher training into this. It's I think you have some of that street preacher dynamism. And it's cool. I love it.
Oh, good, because some people are turned off by that.
So you made a lot of comparisons to the metaphors of religion and slave society and hierarchy and stuff. And that's definitely there in Christianity, but it seems to me that the most potent thing in religion is not God as a master, but God as a parent or a friend. And I think really what people crave more than meaning, which is very abstract, is closeness and an inner companion and something to assuage their loneliness. And so it's a very personal, subjective experience that they're looking for in religion, and that they're afraid of losing by losing the belief in God. So I wonder if you thought about that, or if you have things to say, comfort for people who really need God on an emotional level.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. Some do and some don't. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in this, but I'm guessing there's probably a standard distribution of personality types. Over here are people that are just more gullible and mystical and that, and over here are people that are just naturally more skeptical. I was a true believer. I've got the goosebumps. I was in church and I prayed, and it was beautiful, and I got that parent figure in my mind. In fact, even today, if I want to, I can go back. I won't do it here, but I could pray in the Spirit, and I can feel those same things again. It's a very powerful thing that happens in the mind. But other people, Annie Laurie is a third-generation atheist. She's never felt the need. She kind of snickers when she hears us talk about these things. It's like, and I bet you in this room there's probably a bit of a distribution as well. You know who you are. Some of you are just naturally more, what's the word, mystical, emotional, transcendent, or whatever. Like me, I was just an inch away from hearing voices, if you know what I mean. I was just that kind of a person. But Annie Laurie's father, Paul Gaylor, when he was in church with his parents in Southern Illinois, he was sitting in church. I don't know how old he was, 8 or 10 years old. He was sitting in church with his parents, and he was looking around, and it dawned on him, and he said, "My parents are nuts. They actually believe this stuff." Here's a kid, it never took with him, right? With me, it took like crazy. So you're probably right. There are some people in this society who just feel this kind of need for some connection to something bigger and above themselves. But there's others of you in this room who feel no such thing, and you're just happy without it, right? Perhaps what ties into your question is this instinctive need that we all have. We're a social species, right? We crave interaction, most of us. There's probably a few people at this tail end who are total loners, but most of us want that feeling of connection and community. Church can provide that. And if you're the kind of person who needs that, I'm not saying you are, but if there's a person who does need that, well then church can give you that feeling of community and connection, and that you've got somebody up there with you. If you're the person who doesn't, then you can't sell someone a Band-Aid who's not hurt. I mean, you can't. Even Jesus said in the New Testament, "They who are healthy don't need the doctor. It's only they who are sick," he said. So if you view yourself as sick and needing and wanting, then you're going to look for some kind of an answer, like maybe religion or maybe some other ism of some sort. You're going to find that. We atheists are no threat to that. We atheists are not barging into churches and saying, "Get out of your pews, you stupid people, stop believing this crazy." It's a free world and a free country, and those who feel that need are going to, many of them are going to feel that need is met through their religious views and their religious community. So I don't think that's a very satisfactory answer, but I think a lot of answers have to be unsatisfactory because we're all different. We're all in a different, and you kind of know where you fall on that spectrum, right? There's a whole lot of things. For example, if you see cruelty to animals, so don't raise your hands, okay? But if you see cruelty to animals, you kind of know how you feel. Some of you in this room are going to break out in tears. Some of you might even, if you're like my sister-in-law, you're going to break out into a rage. No, don't. It's just a thing, with an instinctive thing. Others of you in this room, and don't raise your hand, don't care. In fact, there might be a few people who even enjoy seeing cruelty to animals. Naturally, I think some of us are just built in different ways, and we respond to things. So some people, like you're saying, are going to feel this need to want this. It's kind of I don't mean this as a pejorative, but it's kind of a toddler mentality. We want the mommy and daddy to be telling us everything's good and we can hold mommy's hand. But some of us think, let's grow up. We can be a toddler for a while, but let's grow up and, you know, make our own way across the street.
So I definitely fall into that kind of transcendent, I need meaning in my life. But I recently came out very publicly as an atheist, and so I have this conversation about I have transcendent moments where I feel overwhelming love for my son, or I have, you know, find value in community and other people, and people will tell me, well, that's God. That's what we mean when we're talking about religion or spirituality, and I say, no, I already told you I'm an atheist. I know what I mean, and it maybe speaks a little bit to when you're having debates and someone says, I have a personal relationship with Shiva or with Christ. How do you have a conversation after that point? You know, when someone says, no, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what you mean. You're really a religious person. You just don't know that that's what you're feeling. I struggle with how do I say something after that, because they basically told me I don't understand what I mean when I say, no, I'm an atheist.
Well, I will suggest, and remember, there's no atheist authority, so I'm just speaking for myself. Another atheist might answer the question differently, which is fine, and atheists welcome disagreeing with each other. So I would suggest two things that come to mind. The first one is just a difference of labeling. Like you said, you agree that you're having the same experience they are. They're putting one label on it, and you're putting a different label on it. You're not discrediting their experience, and hopefully they're not denying that you're having a similar experience too. We have natural altruism as a species. We can't help it because we evolved from ancestors who cherished life, or we wouldn't be here, right? That time when I just was in the airport and I just went like this and caught this baby that was falling to the floor without even thinking about it, with even pre-rational, something instinctive in me made me do that. Most people in this room would have done the same thing, right? We share this common human feeling of wanting to protect and care, and when you see babies or cute faces or just, you know, that's just the way we are. So you could just agree to disagree that you're having the same experience, but you're calling it this and I'm calling it that. And that raises a good question. If God is, like Paul Tillich said, God is the ground of all being, or something like that, right?
Ultimate concern.
Or ultimate concern, well, whatever words these liberal believers call it. But why call the ground of all being or ultimate concern God? Why not just call it the ground of all being and ultimate concern? Why call a tree God? Why not call a tree a tree? Call it for what it is. What do we gain by adding another label to it, right? Above and beyond it. Or you could play a different game with that and just say, turn it back on the person. You know how people sometimes say, you're an atheist, but you're so nice. You can turn it around and say, you're a Catholic, but you're so nice. You turn it around and just say, what you don't realize is that you're tapping into the same basic biological, animal, instinctive feelings of empathy and altruism that we all have together. So you're calling it God, but you just don't realize that you're tapping into what I have. I've got something special and you have it too. So I'm not suggesting we have to get into big arguments with people. There's maybe better things to do. But if the opportunity is there and you want to talk, and maybe both of those approaches are affirming. It's not denying anything. You're sharing a common humanity. And I know exactly what you're saying, because, in fact, I think it's enhanced by not being religious. I think the love for your children is even better without a God, because it's a love for your children. It's a real thing. It's not, you know, confused and polluted with this whole idea, well, I'm loving my kid because God commands me to. But if God didn't command me to, boy, you'd be in trouble. You know? So those were just two kind of off-the-cuff thoughts, that whatever that's worth.
This is just going to be really quick, because I think you might have already answered it. But when you were a Christian and well, this is like a two-part question. First one, did you say you had a personal relationship with God? And if so, how do you define what that really was now being an atheist? So I feel like you said like biological, instinctive, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I did. I believed it. I felt it. I got goosebumps. I read the Bible. I prayed. I confessed my sins. I asked Christ to come into my heart, make me that new creature. And it was real. I mean, it was very, very real to me. Just like Allah and Muhammad are real to Muslims. Just like Shiva was real to this Vedic astrologer that I debated. You could tell that it was real in his mind, right? It's interesting. The biggest predictor of your religion is geography, right? He's from the Indian subcontinent, so guess what religion he is, right? If you're from Birmingham, Alabama, guess what religion you're going to be, right? So, but yeah, I felt it, and I have atheist friends who tell me, they were never believers, they tell me that I must have been pretending to believe. I must have been just, kidding myself, because they can't imagine themselves believing in something they think is so stupid, right? And I have to remind them, no, I wasn't pretending. It's a very real experience. The religious experience is a very real experience. It doesn't point to anything outside of the mind. A good comparison might be a nightmare. You wake up in the middle of the night. Your heart is beating. Your palms are sweating. You're screaming. You sat up and you woke up the whole house. You just had a very powerful, life-changing, real experience. No one can deny that you had an experience, but there's no monster crawling through the window. In the real world, there is no monster. Your reality in your brain, which affected you in a very strong way, no one can deny, but it's not pointing to anything real outside of the brain. So the religious experience of knowing God is powerful. It's amazing. It's relaxing. It's peace. It's the peace that passes understanding. And I got real goosebumps talking to God and feeling the presence of Jesus. And I can still go into that mode today, which is kind of weird as an atheist. I can actually feel this God thing in the brain. I mean, some of you can and some of you can't. Some of you probably wonder what the heck I'm talking about, right? But some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. So it's a powerful thing, but it's a delusion. In fact, I used the word delusion on that Oprah Winfrey show in 1984. I was struggling for words, and I said, I was deluded. I had this... and I think Richard Dawkins stole that word from me. I think he owes me a nickel for every book he sold, or a dime maybe. So the goosebumps that I thought were evidence of the Holy Spirit, I now realize goosebumps are an evidence of evolution. Why do we get goosebumps? Yeah, but why? Why did the goosebumps poke up? Yeah. And that's one of the reasons. Because our ancestors who had more hair, you've seen animals, you see birds sitting on the branch in the cold, they fluff up their feathers to provide that extra pocket of thermal insulation to slow the heat loss from your body. So our ancestors who were hairier would do that. Or you raise up your fur to look larger to scare off an attacker too. You've seen an animal get scared and you see the cat. So when do you get goosebumps? When you're cold and when you're scared, right? So there's an evidence that we evolved from hairier ancestors. There's one proof of evolution. I thought it was the Holy Spirit. Now I just realize it's freezing weather. It doesn't.
It's really heartening to hear you say you were a true believer, because I also was a believer into my 30s. And sometimes, especially when I get around a crowd of people like you, I feel sort of stupid for having felt that way for so many years. And that said, the question I had was, if the Clergy Project tells us anything, it's that there's a whole lot of really intelligent clergy that have discovered they don't believe anymore. That they've delved into theology, they've invested their lives in it, and discovered they no longer believe. And I have a pet theory that our current Pope is among those. He's just too kind. He's just too good. So I'm curious what your feelings are on our current Pope, and just how you feel where he's taking the Catholic Church, and if you see the resistance he's getting from the more conservative members of the church. What are your feelings on that?
Well, maybe I share your optimism, but I think we have to take people at their word, at least if they say they're believers, then, you know, are we going to second guess someone like that? And there are an awful lot of liberal believers who believe in God and Jesus, and yet they've rejected much of the dogma. The current pope seems to be, at least on the surface, a breath of fresh air. We have to wait and see what happens, if there's any substance to it, you know, if anything really comes from it. But, you know, he was on the cover of Time magazine, Time's most influential, what was it last year? We go on Fox News a lot, and Fox TV a lot, and I was on Bill O'Reilly, when was that, a few months ago, to talk about what do atheists think about the Pope being on the cover of Time magazine? And I think I disappointed him because I said, great, it's a private magazine, we're not going to sue, you know. And I pointed out that I think one of the reasons why the Pope is getting all this attention is because he's less Catholic than his predecessors. He's less of the old boys club, the patriarchal, you know, old way of doing things, and he seems to be more people-centered and less Vatican-centered, right? If that's true, that's great, and I think we should applaud that because it's a move in the right direction. It's a move away from patriarchy and orthodoxy and rigidness into more of a relaxed, you know, people-centered morality. So, who would have thought that Mother Teresa would say that she had doubts about God? You know, some people even say she must have been an atheist. She didn't really feel God's presence at all. I don't think she was an atheist because she said she believed in God, although she didn't feel it. But who knows about this current pope? But, so wouldn't that be nice? Pope comes. Wouldn't that be a headline? Right?
Any other questions?
Yeah, I'd like your response to the following idea. It also comes from looking to biology for explanations about life, and it goes something like this. If you look at the tree of life, you find all the other beings that we share our planet with in the tree of life. But most of them are defined by their survival niche. In other words, they're highly adapted through natural selection, cooperation, competition, all of those stories to provide them with a way of surviving and living. But when you come to us, we don't really fit that mold. Instead of niche survivors, we're niche creators. And so it makes sense. Now, for most species, animals, their behavior is driven unconsciously, and so they're automatic actors, and their behaviors are optimized for their niche specialization. But for us, if we could only act like robots and, you know, have very limited behaviors, we would not be good. We wouldn't be good at creating niches. And so it suggests things like existential angst. You know, what shall I do? How shall I live? What will I be? Are really coming out of an unconscious drive to be successful as niche creators. And it would suggest that that would explain a lot in terms of our concerns about finding purpose and meaning. It may just be, again, coming through our biology and our position on the tree of life. Do you have any comments?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of phrasing it. We are evolved biological organisms, and our big brains, basically, one of the prices we pay. Do cats and ravens sit around contemplating the meaning of life? I mean, are they, why am I here? What is it all for? They're just living, right? They're enjoying their life. And I think with some species you could talk about meaning, especially among some of the primates and others. We had a pet cockatiel in our house who was very sociable and who copied and he said my name and sang songs, and I think it's a matter of degree. I think to some, my daughter Sabrina actually thinks all animals are conscious to some degree or other. She doesn't think consciousness is an on-off thing. Maybe she's right, and maybe there's some merit to that. Maybe the other primates have a degree of consciousness that we wouldn't recognize as full consciousness, and maybe even our pet cockatiel had something. He didn't recognize himself in a mirror, he always thought he was another male invading, you know, so it was posturing. But when he made those sounds, there was a brain creating a sound that had some meaning to convey whatever it meant. So to some lower degree, I think other species also would have what we call meaning. When I reached for that baby, I wasn't standing there contemplating, what is my moral philosophy? How can I show the world that atheists are good people? You know, I wasn't in that. It happened before I even thought, and you've had things like that happen too. So it has to be a combination. It has to be a combination of instincts which we evolved from our ancestors who truly were niche survivors back then, because they were evolved in a certain environment which is different from the environment we are in today, which I think is one of the reasons why some of our instincts don't work today, and why we're trying to use our brains to override some of our instincts. So, for example, tribalism, xenophobia, racism, sexism were natural things back in smaller tribal societies, and almost every human being alive today has some of that just naturally. But we have this brain with a frontal lobe and a rational ability to override some of our natural instincts. It's the same thing that's keeping you from burping out loud during this meeting, right? Even if you felt like it, would you just burp really loudly? Why not? You're checking yourself. You're stopping yourself because we're social animals, and so you're saying, wait a minute. So I think we can rise above things like burping out loud, and we can also rise above sexism. We can rise above racism. Maybe it takes some work. We can educate ourselves to rise above religion as well, which might have some instinctive natural explanations to it. So I guess the main reason is that overpopulation. We have really overpopulated, and the environment we live in now is very much unlike the environment that our distant ancestors evolved in. But we're stuck with their genetics and with the bodies that they gave to us. So, but I like how you say that, niche creators. Is a beaver creating a niche by building a dam? Do birds create niches by building nests?
There's a term called niche construction, and that's the spider web, the bird's nest.
Yeah,
the
those things.
extension of the body of the organism to modify the environment to benefit for benefit.
So maybe a city is like a bird's nest. Maybe a city is, or like a beaver dam. It's a human construction. What? Yeah. Well, thanks.
We'll do 2 more questions.
Hi. So I come from a really religious family. I'm actually the only atheist in my family. And I also have 8 nieces and nephews. And they're all being raised very religiously, obviously. And I kind of struggle with it because on the one hand, I want to talk to them about my atheism. On the other hand, I don't want to upset my brothers and sisters and my family. So I want to know what your opinion would be about approaching young children. I mean, for instance, we don't tell young children there is no Santa Claus until they're a certain age. But with religion, I worry that if I wait too long, it might become ingrained and harder to talk about later. What's your opinion on teaching children about atheism?
Yeah. Teaching about atheism is kind of an intellectual. Why do you think the way you think? And in which case, it's bottom up, right? They're doing their own thinking for themselves. If they don't know you're there, if they don't know we non-believers are here, then where are they going to go? I wish there had been somebody in 1983 that I could have called up and talked to. I felt totally alone until I got that phone call. I thought, oh, there's other atheists that I can actually meet and talk to? Whoa, I was almost afraid of meeting them. I had this idea that atheists were these super robotic, rational, unfeeling, super, and atheists and agnostics are just normal people too. So, don't take my answer too seriously, but I bet you can find some way to let them know you love them and you accept them no matter what they think, but that you have a different opinion from them, and they are welcome to come to you to talk about that. Because I bet some of them will as they get older. Some of them are going to be just like you in this room. You're going to be just like my father-in-law sitting in church. Some of them are going to be like that, wondering, huh? What is all this stuff? And who are they going to talk to? And they'll know you're there. So, unless you happen to know that your family dynamic is robust enough to get in and slug it out. Some families are like that. Let's fight it out and argue. And there's no threat to the family love, right? If you have a family like that, that's great. So maybe some of you have families like that. Let's mix it up. Come on, and still love each other.
One more question.
Last question. So just sort of expanding on with the gentleman here and the young lady and yourself, I guess, for the people who are more spiritual inherently, just in their personal setup, what are your thoughts on like the secular Sunday assembly, groups like that, or even like charity groups like the Foundation Beyond Belief and that sort of things that sort of generate that community under the banner of secularism or atheism? And do you think that's going to become prevalent and is something that's going to develop, or do you think it's kind of a atheist church that doesn't make any sense? What's your opinion on those organizations?
Well, I think they're great. I think there are people who want it and need it, and since it's bottom up, it's not a top-down thing. Who's going to dictate, no, thou shalt not have Sunday assembly? I mean, it's a choice that people make. For me, Sunday's the day of rest. Any chance on a Sunday I have to sleep in, I'm going to sleep in. Because I don't lack interaction with other non-believers. But you can see in some communities where you do feel kind of alone and you want to get together with others, then that's a great place to do that. I get to talk at a lot of Unitarian congregations and ethical culture, and in fact I did the Houston Oasis, which is like a Sunday assembly a year ago last fall. Great people. Potlucks and charity drives and music and lecture, almost like being in church, except they were all atheists, which is kind of cool. So if you're the kind of person who craves that and wants it, then and if it's there, why not? In fact, I've heard there's already some splits going on, which I guess is healthy for even the pastafarians. The vegetarians don't want the meatball on top, right? So, but any respectable religion or movement is going to have a split. Can you name a religion that's not a split off of something? I mean, so it's going to. That's just human nature. So maybe you feel that way, and in fact, there's one in Madison now, isn't there, that just started up, right? Are you involved with it? Where do you meet now?
James Reed.
Oh, James Reed over on the
we rent
east.
from a church because they have all the right amenities.
Yeah. But it's a Unitarian churches, or half of them are atheists anyway, so that's cool. Yeah. Is that where you go?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
for 25 years.
Wow.
Americans are lonely people. Most people join churches because they took a job, moved 2,000 miles, and then wondered why they feel lonely. They join churches not for the religion, they join to be part of a community. We're the most overly individualistic society in history, and we wonder why we don't feel connected and we're not happy. Well, we're social animals, out of society. So I think that's a driver for people to be churchgoers in the United States.
There's a piano at James Reed? Oh, maybe I'll show up. Maybe I'll play the Poor Little Me song for you guys.
Give it up for Dan.
He said, but Peter Hitchens said, let's not talk about evidence. Come on, let's admit what kind of game we're playing here. Let's not talk about arguments. Come on, you atheists. You remind me of the little kids who are just arguing on the playground. Arguments and evidence, blah, 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 blah. What's really at the core of your atheism? He said, it's really, what kind of a person are you? Who would want to live in a universe that has no hope? What's wrong with you atheists? Who would want to live in a universe where you have no expectation of seeing your loved ones again? Who would want to live in a cosmos with no meaning and no ultimate purpose? Who would actively desire and wish to live in a world like that? And he was lecturing us atheists, like, what's wrong with you that you're choosing to live in such a bleak, empty, depressing universe, an atheistic universe? That was his argument at an Oxford debate. That was his argument, basically, just attacking. It was really ad hominem. So, but you hear that a lot. What's the meaning in life? What is the purpose if there's no God, if there's no ultimate standard up there and above there? So, I have a new book coming out. Appropriately, it's coming out on April the 1st. Psalm 14:1 or Psalm 53, the fool had said in his heart, there is no God. By the way, this is one proof that the Bible has at least one error in it. Read Psalm 14. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are all corrupt. They have never done a single good thing. They are all filthy.
In fact, I had to take that book out of my hotel room, the last hotel I was at, and I even wrote a note there. Why do you have a book in here that insults some of your paying customers? That book is calling me a fool and saying I'm filthy. What if it said, all Jews are corrupt and filthy and have never done a good thing? You think anyone would complain about that? And yet all atheists are painted as these horribly corrupt things. So, this book that's coming out on April the 1st is called, and some of you will get this, it's called Life-Driven Purpose. And those of you who laugh understand that. You know Rick Warren, the big megachurch pastor, Saddleback Church in Southern California. Rick Warren, his big blockbuster, best-selling Christian book is called The Purpose-Driven Life. In fact, I was visiting my brother Tom, who's a born-again Christian. He's the one member of our family who stayed in the faith. The rest of us are atheists now, my brother and my mom and dad. We call Tom the white sheep of the family. I visited him last month in Riverside, California, and sure enough, right there next to the Bible. By the way, there weren't very many books in his apartment. That was kind of weird. Can you imagine a place with not many books in it? But anyway, he had the Bible and then The Purpose-Driven Life. Those two books up there next to the TV guide. So walking across the street and a truck was coming, wouldn't you want someone to pull you out of the way? Isn't that a good thing? To want to help, to want to save, to want to care about people? So that's what I thought my evangelism was saving souls from this horrible destiny, from the basement, right? Saving souls from this anger of this deity who, if you don't worship him exactly the right way or on the right day of the week or saying so many words or that you're going to have to be punished. Somebody has got to bleed. Somebody has got to die. I became an atheist in 1983, and for about 4 or 5 months I kept preaching until I finally stopped. I was a hypocrite for 4 or 5 months. In January of '84, I sent out my letter to everybody, announcing I'm no longer a believer. And then I got a job as a computer programmer, which was good luck. A lot of clergy, when they leave the ministry, they don't know what to do. What good is a divinity degree in this economy? In fact, the Clergy Project, of which I'm one of the principal founders, along with Daniel Dennett and Richard Dawkins and Linda Lascola, has about 650 members of it now. Clergy, priests, rabbis, some cantors, ministers who have given up their belief in the supernatural. Some of them are still preaching, and they're trying to find a way out. And I was like that for a few months until I finally got a job. That's the big problem with them. They need another job. They need an income. They have a family that they love. They want to do good in the world. And so the Clergy Project is helping some of these ministers make that transition into civilian life, I guess, or into honest work, I guess we could say it that way. And in 8 months later, in 1984, after I left the ministry, I stopped preaching. I got a call from a producer in a TV show in Chicago saying that they were doing a show, a morning show about atheism, and a woman named Ann Gaylor and her daughter named Annie Laurie Gaylor, who live in Madison, Wisconsin, who founded the Freedom from Religion Foundation, were going to be guests on that show. And I had a good story. I used to be a minister and now I'm an atheist, so could I come to be on that show? And I said, all right, this would be really fun. So they flew me to Chicago, from California to Chicago. And that was the first day that I knowingly talked with any other atheist in my life. And it was Ann Gaylor and Annie Laurie Gaylor. Annie Laurie and I are married now, and in fact we have a videotape of that show. The host of the show was a young woman named Oprah Winfrey. And she was fun, but she packed that audience with Bible thumpers. She packed it with all these arguments. There's moral arguments. There's other types of arguments that believers try to put forth to try to reason to their faith. It's called apologetics. And if you like that kind of thing, it's fun. It's a good exercise. And like Bertrand Russell, I've come to agree with what Bertrand Russell said about these arguments, especially the ontological argument, is that if you, on the surface they look kind of intriguing, wow, yeah, design, yeah, what about, but he said if you scratch beneath the surface, they all just boil down to bad grammar. That's basically what they are. If you unpack them, it's just bad grammar, or circular logic, or it's begging the question. And honestly, how many people do you know that came to their faith in Christ as a result of contemplating the ontological argument? I mean, really, it's kind of like window dressing. It's kind of like a way to pretend like your faith is reasonable. People like William Lane Craig and other, like Norman Geisler. In fact, I debated Norman Geisler right here. It was like, I don't know, my 5th or 8th debate here at the University of Wisconsin. And so often, after a debate, when the opponent realizes that there hasn't really been any progress made and how you're going to sink your teeth into this, often the debate opponent will say, well, maybe you're not convinced by the evidence. Maybe you're not convinced by the arguments. Maybe you're not convinced by, maybe you don't feel any personal need for, a creator or a relationship with this God. But if there's no God, there's no meaning in life. If there's no God, there's no purpose. It's just pointless if there's no God. You hear that a lot. I did a debate in Oxford 2 years ago, Oxford, England, with the mathematician John Lennox, who's a theist, with Christopher Hitchens' brother, Peter Hitchens, and it was just after Christopher Hitchens had died, and Peter Hitchens is a strongly believing Anglican, and then an Anglican priest, and it was me and Michael Shermer and a philosopher named Peter Millikan. The three of us went against the three of them. It was really fun. It was like, we had to wear bow ties and tuxedos, and it was all parliamentary. You know how it is in that. That's where Parliament actually began, was in that Oxford Debating Society room, with all these statues and pictures and all. It was really kind of neat. We had to do a toast to the Queen and all that. So we did this debate, and Richard Dawkins was in the audience too. He should have been the one debating, but he was in the audience. So, but Peter Hitchens made that very argument. Peter Hitchens got up, and he was. In fact, I'm reproducing it in my next book, and you can read the paragraph that he. Isn't that great news? All you have to do is come up here to the porch. Come here. Give my son a big hug. Tell him you love. Thank him for what he did for you. And come up, give me a big hug, and you can move in with us. We'll live up in the attic together, and you can spend forever just telling me how great I am. Isn't that the best news in the world? So what would you do? Would you just keep walking? I got to get to work. Sorry. Thanks for telling me that. So that's the good news of the gospel, basically, right? For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in Him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Perish from what? What punishment? From His own punishment. And the only way His anger is appeased is by some kind of blood atonement. Something's got to die. Something's got to bleed. If you read the Old Testament, you see just blood, 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 blood. How many sacrifices? There's only 3 places I found in the entire Old Testament where anybody said they loved God. Can you believe that? God's always telling people, love me, love me. I'm jealous. Don't love anybody else. Don't look at other idols, just me. Kind of like a man, husband, if you ever look sideways at another man, you're in trouble. It's kind of that kind of thing. It's a jealous God who just wants his bride for himself. And he's always telling them to love him. But I always found 3 places where somebody actually said that they loved God. 2 of them were the psalmist, David. By the way, David was chosen because he was more genocidal than Saul. Saul killed his thousands, but David killed his 10,000s. He was a greater, he was a man after God's own heart because he was a better genocidal murderer than Saul was. Saul got dethroned because he didn't finish the job. But Solomon said that he loved God by burning 1,000 animals. So there's 3 times at least in the Old Testament I found that somebody said they actually loved God. In the Bible, love is a one-way thing. It's a top-down kind of thing. I own you, I possess you, you love me, you don't love anyone else, and I'm going to love you, and I'm going to show you how great I am to you, but you stay with me. If you don't, you're in trouble. In fact, you read what happens, that kind of love within the Christian message. But when I was a believer, I thought it was important, and I thought heaven and hell were real. I thought they were eternal realities and that people needed to know that. I thought I was doing you a favor. I was that guy on campus, I was that self-confident. I had the truth. And truth has to be absolute, and morality has to be based on absolute objective principles, or else we're just ships without a rudder. We don't know why we're here. We don't know what our meaning is or our purpose in life. And I thought you would want to know that. Yeah, it was your lucky day when you got to know me, because I had this gospel message. And it'd be like if you were, true believers, and they were going after us. And that was the very first time I had publicly spoken about my atheism before any audience, and it was a TV audience. And it was the first time I'd ever publicly spoken before a hostile audience, and I loved that. I thought, there's nothing more exciting than be talking to an audience that hates what you're saying. It's really an interesting thing. When you're a preacher before a congregation, it's kind of blah, right? I mean, they all already agree with you, right? You can say these things, and you get the applause and the amens and all that. And occasionally there might be some questions. Not once in 19 years of preaching, not once did anyone come up to me after my sermon and ask me, what were your sources? What references did you use? Who did you consult? No one actually asked me any intelligent questions about it. People were coming to church to worship, to praise, to be with God. And so, talking before a hostile audience like that, and Oprah had packed that place. It was really fun. And you can see us looking at each other. In fact, we showed our daughter, Sabrina. She's a senior at Whitewater right now. Sabrina, we showed her the videotape. You can see it online, of the day her mom and dad met on Oprah's show. And she was laughing and laughing, not just at the 1980s styles in music. And I had hair, I had a lot of hair. And and one of the audience members was calling Annie Laurie a witch. You're a witch because you're defying God. And I thought, wow, this is great. This is a lot better than preaching. This is like saying something. Saying something there's a differential there, right? There's something that's, and if you're making people think or making them upset or whatever, you're saying something that's different. It cuts across the status quo. So a few months after that, February of '85, I did my first public debate. And since then, I've done 118 public debates, meaning moderated and timed before an audience. In fact, one of them was right here, wasn't it? When was that, Sam? It was earlier this year, wasn't it? Yeah. With Matt Slick? Yeah, and I'll put that thing on. And Matt really was slick, so that was a good debate. Is that online?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So you can see that. He's a Calvinist presuppositionalist. The Christian apologists all have different kind of flavors, and in fact, a lot of them fight with each other because there's different theologies. And so I've debated all sorts of, and I'm sure many of you have too, the arguments. There's about a dozen arguments. There's cosmological arguments like first cause. There's teleological arguments like the design arguments. There's ontological arguments, and some people are still using them. I debated Richard Swinburne in Dublin on the ontological arguments.